When Olympus Has Fallen stormed into theaters in 2013, few could have predicted that its gritty, claustrophobic tale of a lone Secret Service agent fighting to reclaim a besieged White House would spawn a full-fledged franchise. Yet the film's surprising commercial success, built on a foundation of raw, unapologetic action and Gerard Butler's magnetic intensity as Agent Mike Banning, created enough momentum to greenlight a sequel that would think bigger, louder, and more geopolitically ambitious. That sequel, London Has Fallen, arrived in 2016 under the direction of Swedish filmmaker Babak Najafi, stepping into the chair vacated by Antoine Fuqua. It was a bold handoff, entrusting the sequel's expanded scope to a director whose prior work had been more modest in scale, but the studio's confidence reflected a broader industry trend of the era: take a successful action premise, relocate it to a new international backdrop, and multiply the explosions. The screenplay passed through several hands: Creighton Rothenberger, Katrin Benedict, Chad St. John, and Christian Gudegeist all contributed to shaping the narrative, a collaborative process that often signals a production wrestling with tone and structure behind the scenes. What emerged was a film that doubled down on everything that made its predecessor a guilty pleasure for action enthusiasts: relentless pacing, a body count that climbs into the hundreds, and a plot that uses real-world anxieties about terrorism as fuel for popcorn spectacle. Whether that doubling down paid off creatively is a question that divided critics and audiences alike, but there's no denying that London Has Fallen understood exactly what its audience wanted and delivered it without apology. The premise: a funeral turned battlefield. At the heart of the film's plot is a scenario dripping with dramatic irony and macabre spectacle. The British Prime Minister has died under mysterious circumstances, and world leaders from across the globe descend upon London to pay their respects at his funeral. It's meant to be a moment of solemn unity, the G7 nations gathered in a display of collective mourning and diplomatic solidarity. Instead, it becomes the stage for one of the most audacious terrorist assaults in modern action cinema, as an international arms dealer orchestrates a devastating, coordinated strike designed to eliminate multiple heads of state in a single, brutal stroke. This premise taps into something the Has Fallen series does particularly well, transforming symbols of stability and ceremony into arenas of chaos. Just as the White House represented the impenetrable heart of American power in the first film, the funeral of a world leader represents the pinnacle of international diplomatic tradition: pomp, security, and solemnity all rolled into one. By shattering that sanctity within the first act, the film immediately signals that no institution, however revered, is safe from its villain's reach. London's most iconic landmarks become battlegrounds one after another, a visual strategy that turns the city's postcard image inside out. Tower Bridge, the streets around Westminster, and other recognizable corners of the capital are repurposed as sites of ambush and destruction, a choice that gives the film a sense of geographic specificity even as its narrative logic sometimes strains credulity. Mike Banning, the reluctant guardian angel. Returning to the role that redefined his career trajectory, Gerard Butler once again embodies Secret Service agent Mike Banning, a character who by this point has become something of a modern archetype, the unstoppable protector whose personal code of loyalty outweighs any bureaucratic caution. Banning's relationship with President Benjamin Asher, played with steady gravitas by Aaron Eckhart, forms the emotional spine of the film. Their dynamic isn't simply that of bodyguard and principal, it's colored by genuine camaraderie, mutual respect, and the weight of shared trauma from the events of the first film. What makes Banning compelling, even to viewers skeptical of the film's more outlandish set pieces, is the way the screenplay frames his violence as an extension of devotion rather than mere bloodlust. He's not fighting because he enjoys it, or at least, that's the narrative's insistence, even as the film revels in the choreography of his kills with an enthusiasm that borders on gleeful. This tension between Banning's stated reluctance and the film's evident delight in his brutality is one of the more fascinating undercurrents running through the Has Fallen series. Butler plays him with a weary intensity, a man who has seen too much and lost too much, yet who continues to throw himself into harm's way because the alternative, failing the people he's sworn to protect, is unthinkable. The film also threads in Banning's personal life, particularly his impending fatherhood, a narrative device meant to raise the emotional stakes of his mission. It's a familiar trope in action cinema, the protector who has everything to lose personally even as he risks his life professionally, but it lands with enough sincerity to give Butler's performance an additional layer of vulnerability beneath the muscle and gunfire. Morgan Freeman's Vice President Trumbull and the Chain of Command. Morgan Freeman reprises his role as Vice President Alan Trumbull, a character whose gravitas and measured authority provide a necessary counterbalance to the chaos unfolding overseas. While Banning and Asher are caught in the thick of London's collapse, Trumbull operates from the Situation Room in Washington, coordinating the American response and grappling with the political ramifications of an attack that threatens to decapitate an entire tier of global leadership. Freeman's presence lends the film an air of institutional credibility. His voice alone seems to carry the weight of constitutional order even as everything around his character threatens to spiral into anarchy. This structural choice, splitting the narrative between the visceral, ground-level chaos in London and the more cerebral, strategic deliberations in Washington, allows the film to modulate its pacing. The scenes in the Situation Room, populated by supporting players including Angela Bassett as Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs, Melissa Leo as Defense Secretary Ruth McMillan, and Robert Foster as General Edward Clegg, serve as a kind of Greek chorus, contextualizing the stakes of Banning's one-man war even as they occasionally slow the momentum. It's a narrative technique inherited from countless disaster and thriller films before it, but it serves its purpose here, reminding audiences that the events in London aren't merely a personal odyssey for Banning but a crisis with global implications, the villain, Amir Barkawi, and the politics of vengeance. At the center of the conspiracy is Amir Barkawi, portrayed by Alon Moniaboutbal, an international arms dealer whose motivations are rooted in a desire for retribution against Western powers, particularly the United States, for a drone strike that killed his daughter during her wedding. This backstory is significant because it attempts, however clumsily the execution may be judged, to ground the villain's terrorism in a specific, personal grievance rather than presenting him as an abstract embodiment of evil. The film gestures toward the uncomfortable reality that American military interventions have produced collateral damage with lasting human consequences, even as it ultimately frames Barkawi's response as monstrous and irredeemable. This is where London Has Fallen invites its most pointed criticism. Reviewers and commentators noted that the film's handling of its villain and the broader depiction of Middle Eastern characters leaned into reductive stereotypes, presenting an ensemble of terrorists whose characterization rarely extends beyond menace and fanaticism. The wedding strike backstory offers a moment of potential nuance, an acknowledgement that violence begets violence, that American foreign policy has real victims, but the film doesn't sustain that complexity. Instead, it pivots quickly back into the register of a straightforward action thriller, where the moral clarity of hero versus villain is never seriously questioned. Barkawi's son Cameron, played by Walid Zuaita, serves as the operational mastermind executing the attack on the ground, working alongside a network of infiltrators who have spent years embedding themselves within London's security and infrastructure systems. An escalation in scale and body count. If Olympus Has Fallen was a siege film, a single location under sustained assault, evoking the claustrophobic tension of a fortress under siege, London Has Fallen trades that intimacy for sprawl. The action expands across an entire city, with Banning and Asher forced to navigate a gauntlet of ambushes, safe houses, and firefights as they attempt to reach safety. This shift in scale is both the film's greatest asset and its most frequently criticized flaw. On one hand, the expanded canvas allows for a relentless, almost video game-like structure of escalating set pieces, a motorcade ambush, a rooftop chase, a safe house infiltration, a climactic assault on a fortified compound. Each sequence ups the ante, delivering the kind of kinetic spectacle that action fans crave. On the other hand, this sprawl comes at the cost of narrative coherence and character development. The sheer volume of London police officers, security personnel, and unnamed extras mowed down over the course of the film's runtime becomes almost numbing in its casualness, a criticism many reviewers leveled directly at the film, noting that the body count reaches into the hundreds with little regard for the human cost being depicted. Where the first film's violence felt weighted with consequence, tethered to a location and a cast of characters the audience had come to know, the sequel's violence often feels like set dressing, a means of maintaining momentum rather than building dramatic tension. Direction and visual style under Babak Najafi. Babak Najafi's direction represents a departure from Antoine Fuqua's more grounded, tactile approach in the original film. Najafi leans into a grittier, more frenetic visual style, employing handheld camera work and rapid editing to convey the chaos of urban warfare. There's an ambition in some of the film's action choreography, notably a sequence designed to evoke the feel of a continuous take as Banning navigates through a series of connected combat encounters, that showcases genuine technical skill, even if the execution occasionally sacrifices clarity for kinetic energy. The decision to shoot substantial portions of the film in London beginning in October 2014 lends the production a degree of authenticity that pure soundstage work couldn't replicate. The city's actual geography, even when digitally embellished or rearranged for dramatic effect, gives the film's sense of place a tangibility that grounds its more outlandish plot developments. Recognizable landmarks under siege carry an inherent visual power, audiences don't need extensive exposition to understand the symbolic weight of chaos erupting around structures they recognize from travel photographs and news broadcasts. Critical reception, a franchise diminishing returns. Upon its release on March 4, 2016, through Focus Features under the revived Gramercy Pictures label, London Has Fallen faced a wave of negative critical reception, a marked contrast to the more mixed to moderately positive reception its predecessor had received. Critics frequently pointed to the film's jingoistic tone, its indulgence in gratuitous violence without corresponding emotional weight, and its reliance on cultural stereotypes in depicting its antagonists and the broader conflict driving the plot. The screenplay, having passed through multiple writers, bore some of the hallmarks of a production searching for identity, tonal inconsistencies, underdeveloped supporting characters, and a plot that prioritized momentum over coherence. Yet despite this critical drubbing, the film found a receptive audience among viewers who approached it purely as an exercise in undemanding, high-octane entertainment. This divide between critical and audience reception is a familiar pattern in action cinema, particularly for films operating in the tradition established by 1980s and 1990s action heroes, stories that prioritize spectacle, star charisma, and visceral thrills over narrative sophistication or social commentary. London Has Fallen seemed to understand its own identity in this regard, embracing a straightforward, unpretentious approach to genre filmmaking that resonated with a specific segment of moviegoers even as it alienated critics looking for more substance. When Olympus Has Fallen stormed into theaters in 2013, few could have predicted that its gritty, claustrophobic tale of a lone Secret Service agent fighting to reclaim a besieged White House would spawn a full-fledged franchise. Yet the film's surprising commercial success, built on a foundation of raw, unapologetic action and Gerard Butler's magnetic intensity as Agent Mike Banning, created enough momentum to greenlight a sequel that would think bigger, louder, and more geopolitically ambitious. That sequel, London Has Fallen, arrived in 2016 under the direction of Swedish filmmaker Babak Najafi, stepping into the chair vacated by Antoine Fuqua. It was a bold handoff, entrusting the sequel's expanded scope to a director whose prior work had been more modest in scale, but the studio's confidence reflected a broader industry trend of the era: take a successful action premise, relocate it to a new international backdrop, and multiply the explosions. The screenplay passed through several hands: Creighton Rothenberger, Katrin Benedict, Chad St. John, and Christian Gudegeist all contributed to shaping the narrative, a collaborative process that often signals a production wrestling with tone and structure behind the scenes. What emerged was a film that doubled down on everything that made its predecessor a guilty pleasure for action enthusiasts: relentless pacing, a body count that climbs into the hundreds, and a plot that uses real-world anxieties about terrorism as fuel for popcorn spectacle. Whether that doubling down paid off creatively is a question that divided critics and audiences alike, but there's no denying that London Has Fallen understood exactly what its audience wanted and delivered it without apology. The premise: a funeral turned battlefield. At the heart of the film's plot is a scenario dripping with dramatic irony and macabre spectacle. The British Prime Minister has died under mysterious circumstances, and world leaders from across the globe descend upon London to pay their respects at his funeral. It's meant to be a moment of solemn unity, the G7 nations gathered in a display of collective mourning and diplomatic solidarity. Instead, it becomes the stage for one of the most audacious terrorist assaults in modern action cinema, as an international arms dealer orchestrates a devastating, coordinated strike designed to eliminate multiple heads of state in a single, brutal stroke. This premise taps into something the Has Fallen series does particularly well, transforming symbols of stability and ceremony into arenas of chaos. Just as the White House represented the impenetrable heart of American power in the first film, the funeral of a world leader represents the pinnacle of international diplomatic tradition: pomp, security, and solemnity all rolled into one. By shattering that sanctity within the first act, the film immediately signals that no institution, however revered, is safe from its villain's reach. London's most iconic landmarks become battlegrounds one after another, a visual strategy that turns the city's postcard image inside out. Tower Bridge, the streets around Westminster, and other recognizable corners of the capital are repurposed as sites of ambush and destruction, a choice that gives the film a sense of geographic specificity even as its narrative logic sometimes strains credulity. Mike Banning, the reluctant guardian angel. Returning to the role that redefined his career trajectory, Gerard Butler once again embodies Secret Service agent Mike Banning, a character who by this point has become something of a modern archetype, the unstoppable protector whose personal code of loyalty outweighs any bureaucratic caution. Banning's relationship with President Benjamin Asher, played with steady gravitas by Aaron Eckhart, forms the emotional spine of the film. Their dynamic isn't simply that of bodyguard and principal, it's colored by genuine camaraderie, mutual respect, and the weight of shared trauma from the events of the first film. What makes Banning compelling, even to viewers skeptical of the film's more outlandish set pieces, is the way the screenplay frames his violence as an extension of devotion rather than mere bloodlust. He's not fighting because he enjoys it, or at least, that's the narrative's insistence, even as the film revels in the choreography of his kills with an enthusiasm that borders on gleeful. This tension between Banning's stated reluctance and the film's evident delight in his brutality is one of the more fascinating undercurrents running through the Has Fallen series. Butler plays him with a weary intensity, a man who has seen too much and lost too much, yet who continues to throw himself into harm's way because the alternative, failing the people he's sworn to protect, is unthinkable. The film also threads in Banning's personal life, particularly his impending fatherhood, a narrative device meant to raise the emotional stakes of his mission. It's a familiar trope in action cinema, the protector who has everything to lose personally even as he risks his life professionally, but it lands with enough sincerity to give Butler's performance an additional layer of vulnerability beneath the muscle and gunfire. Morgan Freeman's Vice President Trumbull and the Chain of Command. Morgan Freeman reprises his role as Vice President Alan Trumbull, a character whose gravitas and measured authority provide a necessary counterbalance to the chaos unfolding overseas. While Banning and Asher are caught in the thick of London's collapse, Trumbull operates from the Situation Room in Washington, coordinating the American response and grappling with the political ramifications of an attack that threatens to decapitate an entire tier of global leadership. Freeman's presence lends the film an air of institutional credibility. His voice alone seems to carry the weight of constitutional order even as everything around his character threatens to spiral into anarchy. This structural choice, splitting the narrative between the visceral, ground-level chaos in London and the more cerebral, strategic deliberations in Washington, allows the film to modulate its pacing. The scenes in the Situation Room, populated by supporting players including Angela Bassett as Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs, Melissa Leo as Defense Secretary Ruth Macmillan, and Robert Foster. London Has Fallen stands as a fascinating case study in the mechanics of modern action franchise filmmaking, a film that understood precisely what had made its predecessor a hit and multiplied those elements without significant reinvention. Its expanded scope, relocating the action from a single besieged building to an entire city under coordinated assault, delivered the kind of escalation sequels are expected to provide, even as that escalation came with diminishing narrative returns. The film's uncomfortable handling of its geopolitical themes and its indulgence in stereotype remain legitimate and lasting points of criticism, tempering any straightforward celebration of its technical action craft. Yet dismissing the film purely on those grounds would overlook what it accomplished on its own terms, a lean, propulsive thriller that gave Gerard Butler another opportunity to embody a character audiences had grown attached to, that reunited a strong ensemble cast around a premise dripping with dramatic potential, and that ultimately proved commercially successful enough to sustain the franchise for another installment. In the end, London Has Fallen is less interested in prestige than in pure, unfiltered momentum, a film content to let its city burn, its bullets fly, and its hero run, confident that audiences hungry for exactly that spectacle would follow him every step of the way. Every great revenge thriller needs an inciting wound, a moment of violence so absolute that it justifies, at least within the internal logic of the story, everything that follows. London Has Fallen opens with precisely that kind of wound, though it delivers it with a chilling procedural coolness rather than melodrama. G8 intelligence services have tracked down Amir Barkawi, a Pakistani arms trafficker whose activities have made him one of the most wanted terrorist masterminds in the world. They locate him at his compound during what should be one of the most joyous occasions imaginable, his daughter's wedding. Rather than a tactical raid or an attempt at capture, the response is swift and merciless, a drone strike that obliterates the celebration, killing Barkawi's family and, as far as anyone can determine in the moment, Barkawi himself. This opening sequence functions as more than mere prologue, it's the thematic key that unlocks everything the film wants to say, and, more pointedly, everything it ultimately chooses not to say, about the cost of counter-terrorism waged from the sky. There's a haunting asymmetry embedded in this scene. A wedding, an event synonymous across cultures with hope, continuity, and the promise of a family's future, becomes instead a grave. The strike is presented with clinical detachment, the kind of sanitized language of modern warfare, coordinates, authorization, execution, that strips the act of its visceral human cost until the audience is shown, in brutal clarity, exactly what that cost looks like on the ground. It's a bold choice for a film that will spend its remaining runtime asking audiences to root unambiguously for the American protagonists, because it plants a seed of moral complication that never fully resolves. Barkawi didn't simply decide one day to become a terrorist, he was made one, radicalized by grief and loss inflicted by the very governments he will spend the rest of the film trying to destroy. The 2-year time jump that follows this prologue does important narrative work, allowing Barkawi's presumed death to settle into history, into the comfortable assumption of victory that lulls the world's intelligence agencies into a false sense of closure. It's a classic thriller device, the villain believed dead, quietly plotting his return, but here it carries additional weight because the audience has witnessed the atrocity that seeded his vengeance firsthand. We're not meeting a cartoonish Avildor whose motivations are left to speculation. We've watched the precise moment his humanity was, in his own eyes, stolen from him. Death of a prime minister and the gathering of nations. The engine that drives the plot into motion is the sudden death of British Prime Minister James Wilson, an event initially presented to the world as a natural tragedy but later revealed to be the deliberate machination of Barkawi's elaborate revenge scheme. Wilson's poisoning is a masterstroke of narrative engineering because it accomplishes something a direct assault never could. It lures the leaders of the G7 nations, the most heavily protected individuals on the planet, into a single, predictable location, all while providing an emotionally resonant, entirely innocent pretext. Nobody suspects a funeral. Nobody imagines that a nation's expression of grief and diplomatic solidarity could itself be the trap. This is where the film's title starts to earn its dramatic irony. London, one of the world's oldest and most fortified capitals, a city synonymous with centuries of monarchy, empire, and institutional permanence, becomes the unwitting stage for an act of engineered chaos. The gathering of G7 leaders, representatives of Canada, Germany, Japan, Italy, France, and the United States, alongside the United Kingdom's own leadership, creates a target-rich environment unlike anything a terrorist organization could hope to engineer through direct confrontation. It's a chilling illustration of how ceremony and vulnerability can become intertwined, how the very rituals of mourning and diplomatic tradition can be weaponized against the people they are meant to honor. Banning's reluctant deployment. Amid this geopolitical powder keg, the film roots its human stakes in the domestic circumstances of Mike Banning. Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs assigns him to lead President Benjamin Asher's overseas security detail for the London trip, a routine assignment made anything but routine by the fact that Banning's wife, Leah, is due to give birth any day. This narrative choice does exactly what it's designed to do. It raises the personal stakes of Banning's mission before a single shot has been fired. Every action hero needs a reason to want to come home, something more tangible than professional duty, and Banning's impending fatherhood provides exactly that anchor. It transforms what might otherwise be a straightforward bodyguard narrative into something with an added dimension of urgency. Banning isn't just fighting to keep the president alive, he's fighting to survive long enough to meet his child. There's a poignant tension baked into this setup. Banning is a man whose entire identity is built around unwavering loyalty and sacrifice for his country, yet is being asked to leave behind the most significant personal milestone of his life to do so. The film doesn't dwell excessively on this internal conflict, but it doesn't need to. The mere presence of this ticking domestic clock adds a layer of dramatic tension that colors every subsequent action sequence. Every near-death encounter Banning survives isn't just a victory for the mission, it's a step closer to a reunion the audience is quietly, desperately hoping he'll get to have. The fateful detour, Somerset House and an early arrival. One of the film's more elegant pieces of plotting involves the sequence of events surrounding Air Force One's landing at Stansted Airport and the subsequent decision to route President Asher to Somerset House via Marine One ahead of schedule. This seemingly minor logistical adjustment, Banning's initiative to move up the timeline, becomes the single most consequential decision of the entire film. It's a classic thriller mechanism, the small, almost incidental choice that unravels a meticulously planned conspiracy. Cameron Barkawi's forces have planned their assault with military precision, timed to coincide with Asher's expected arrival at St. Paul's Cathedral. Banning's decision to arrive early, born purely of professional caution rather than any awareness of the coming storm, throws a wrench into machinery that has been years in the making. This detail rewards attentive viewers with a satisfying sense of causality. Nothing in the chaos that follows happens purely by luck or contrivance. It stems directly from Banning's characteristic instinct toward caution and preparedness, the same qualities that have defined him since his introduction in the franchise's first installment. It's a subtle reinforcement of the film's central thesis about its hero. Banning's value isn't merely his capacity for violence, but his professional instinct, the accumulated wisdom of a career spent anticipating threats before they materialize. London erupts, the coordinated assault. What follows is one of the most audacious sequences in the entire Has Fallen franchise. A coordinated, citywide terrorist assault unleashed the moment Asher's presidential motorcade arrives at St. Paul's Cathedral. Cameron Barkawi's mercenary army doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic explosion. Instead, it emerges from within the very fabric of London's own security apparatus. Disguised as Metropolitan Police officers, as members of the ceremonial Queen's Guard, and as first responders of every stripe, the attackers exploit the fundamental trust a city places in its uniformed protectors. This is perhaps the film's most unsettling conceptual achievement. The horror isn't simply that violence erupts, but that it erupts from sources the population has been conditioned to trust implicitly. When the people meant to protect you become the instruments of your destruction, the resulting panic carries a uniquely disorienting terror. The scale of the assault's success is staggering and delivered with brutal efficiency. The leaders of Canada, Germany, Japan, Italy, and France are all killed in the chaos, a decapitation strike against the Western world's leadership that would have seemed almost too audacious for fiction if the film didn't commit so fully to its execution. Major landmarks are damaged in the resulting mayhem, the visual iconography of London's history and permanence literally crumbling under assault, while mass panic spreads through streets that moments earlier had been arranged with the solemn order of state ceremony. It's a sequence engineered for maximum spectacle, but it also serves the film's underlying thematic project, demonstrating that even the world's most secure gatherings, protected by the combined might of the world's most powerful nations, can be brought to catastrophic ruin by an enemy patient and resourceful enough to exploit institutional trust. Marine One down, escalation in Hyde Park. Banning's early arrival with Asher has spared them the initial carnage at St. Paul's, but the film refuses to let its protagonists escape so easily. As Banning attempts to extract the president via Marine One, Islamic terrorists armed with Stinger missiles, the kind of shoulder-fired weaponry capable of downing even heavily armored military aircraft, force a catastrophic crash landing in Hyde Park. This sequence marks a significant escalation in the personal stakes of the narrative, delivering the story's first major gut punch, the death of Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs, a character who has been positioned throughout the film's opening act as a figure of competence and authority. Jacobs's death accomplishes crucial narrative work beyond simple shock value. It strips away institutional support from Banning, isolating him and Asher within a hostile, collapsing city with no immediate chain of command to rely upon. The Marine One crash also functions as a visceral demonstration of the sheer scale of resources Barkawi's operation has assembled. This isn't a scrappy band of insurgents improvising with whatever weapons they can scrounge, but a sophisticated paramilitary force equipped with military-grade ordnance, capable of downing an aircraft that represents one of the most heavily defended targets imaginable. The message is unambiguous: nowhere in London is safe, not the ceremonial grandeur of St. Paul's, not the presumed security of presidential air transport, nowhere. Into the underground, a city in darkness. With Marine One destroyed and Jacobs dead, Banning makes the pragmatic decision to escort Asher into the London Underground, seeking the relative safety of the city's subterranean transit network as London's power grid fails above them and its residents are ordered to shelter indoors. This sequence shifts the film's register in a meaningful way, trading the loud spectacle of coordinated citywide assault for something more intimate and claustrophobic. The darkness of the underground, combined with the citywide blackout, creates a visual and tonal parallel to the very kind of siege cinema atmosphere that defined the original Olympus Has Fallen, two men alone, cut off from support, navigating a hostile environment where any shadow could conceal an enemy. There's something thematically resonant about London itself going dark in this moment, the modern metropolis stripped of its infrastructure and reduced to something more primal and vulnerable. A city defined by its illumination, its iconic skyline, its bustling streets, its ceaseless energy, plunged into blackout mirrors the collapse of the assumed order and security that had defined the day's proceedings just hours earlier. It's a visual shorthand for how quickly the trappings of modern civilization can be stripped away when the systems underpinning them are deliberately, systematically dismantled. Washington responds, Trumbull's investigation. While Banning and Asher fight for survival on the ground in London, the film cuts back to Washington, D.C., where Vice President Alan Trumbull assumes the burden of crisis management from the other side of the Atlantic. Trumbull's scenes serve a vital structural function, providing the audience with broader context for the unfolding catastrophe even as they offer a necessary tonal counterbalance to the chaos in London. Working alongside British authorities, Trumbull attempts to track down Asher's location and make sense of an attack whose scale defies easy comprehension. The film delivers one of its most chilling moments through Trumbull's direct communication with Barkawi himself, a phone call that confirms what astute viewers may have already suspected. The arms dealer believed dead in that drone strike 2 years prior is very much alive, having survived the very attack meant to eliminate him, and is now operating from Sana'a, orchestrating his revenge from a position of calculated safety. Barkawi's voice, calm and controlled even as he describes his intentions, provides the film's clearest articulation of its villain's psychology. He reveals that he poisoned Prime Minister Wilson specifically to lure the G7 leaders into his trap, and he promises with unsettling composure to livestream President Asher's execution the moment Cameron's forces capture him. This detail, the intention to broadcast an execution to a global audience, taps into very real anxieties about how modern terrorism has adapted to exploit digital media, using the immediacy and reach of live streaming technology to maximize psychological impact and propaganda value. It's a chilling, contemporary touch that grounds Barkawi's operation in tactics recognizable from real-world extremist organizations, lending his scheme an unsettling plausibility even amid the film's more heightened action movie excesses. The hunt for Barkawi's network. Back in Washington, Trumbull orders his staff to trace Barkawi's business holdings and financial networks, seeking any thread that might connect the arms dealer to the unfolding assault and, crucially, help locate where Asher and Banning might be hiding. This procedural element of the plot grounds the film's more explosive set pieces in something resembling genuine intelligence work, even if compressed and simplified for cinematic pacing. Meanwhile, British authorities make the difficult tactical decision to stand down all first responders across the city, a counterintuitive but strategically sound choice that allows anyone still moving through London streets to be more readily identified as one of the attackers, since legitimate emergency personnel have all been withdrawn. This decision underscores the film's engagement with the practical realities of urban counter-terrorism response, even within its heightened, spectacle-driven narrative framework. It's a demonstration of institutional adaptability under crisis, British authorities essentially conceding temporary control of their streets in order to more effectively identify and neutralize the threat operating within them. A sign in the darkness, Banning's improvised lifeline. Trapped within the underground and cut off from conventional communication, Banning demonstrates the kind of resourceful improvisation that has defined his character throughout the franchise. He leaves a sign designed to be spotted by satellite surveillance, a low-tech solution to an extraordinarily high-tech problem, banking on the assumption that American intelligence assets will be scanning the city from above in search of exactly this kind of signal. It's a small but effective demonstration of Banning's tactical intelligence, his understanding that even amid total communications blackout, the eyes of a superpower surveillance apparatus remain a resource he can leverage if he thinks creatively enough about how to reach them. This gambit pays off, leading Banning to guide Asher toward a safe house where they connect with MI6 agent Jacqueline Marshall, who provides them with a crucial briefing on the situation as it stands. The introduction of Marshall as an ally injects fresh energy into the narrative at a moment when Banning and Asher's isolation has begun to feel genuinely dire, offering both the characters and the audience a renewed sense that rescue remains possible. When Marshall receives confirmation via voice message from Trumbull that Banning's satellite sign has indeed been spotted, and that an extraction team is now en route, the film delivers a crucial beat of hope precisely calibrated to reset tension before the inevitable next wave of complications arrives. The machinery of a modern action thriller. Taken together, this extended sequence of plot beats, from the drone strike prologue through the extraction team's dispatch, showcases London has fallen operating at the height of its narrative ambition. The film juggles an impressive number of moving pieces, geopolitical backstory, domestic stakes for its protagonist, a meticulously planned terrorist assault exploiting institutional trust, a villain whose motivations are rooted in genuine, if selectively explored, grievance, and a procedural thread following the American response from Washington. It's a lot of narrative machinery to keep running simultaneously. Wolves in sheep's clothing, the Delta Force deception. Few moments in modern action cinema capture the paranoia of urban warfare quite as effectively as the sequence in which Mike Banning watches a team identifying itself as Delta Force approach the safe house where he's sheltering President Asher. On paper, this should be the moment of relief the audience has been waiting for, an elite American military unit, the very embodiment of competent rescue, arriving to extract the president from a city that has descended into chaos. The security monitors confirm their approach, their formation, their bearing, everything that should signal salvation. And yet Banning, drawing on the same instinctual vigilance that has defined his character since his introduction in the franchise's first installment, recognizes almost immediately that something is wrong. This is one of the most quietly effective character beats in the entire film, because it doesn't rely on a dramatic reveal or a convenient plot device. It relies entirely on Banning's accumulated expertise, his years of training and field experience allowing him to spot the subtle tells that distinguish genuine American special forces from an imposter unit dressed to deceive. Whether it's a detail in their movement, their equipment, or some other instinctive read that the film leaves appropriately ambiguous, Banning's realization that these are Barkawi's men in disguise transforms what should have been a moment of relief into yet another life-or-death confrontation. The subsequent violence is swift and merciless. Banning doesn't hesitate, doesn't second-guess his read on the situation. He kills the entire imposter team before they can execute whatever plan Cameron had devised for this ambush. This sequence reinforces one of the film's central preoccupations, the total collapse of trust as a viable survival strategy in this version of London. Throughout the film, the enemy's most devastating weapon isn't firepower or numbers, it's disguise, the systematic exploitation of the uniforms and institutional markers that a functioning society relies upon to distinguish friend from foe. Just as the earlier assault weaponized police uniforms and ceremonial guard regalia, this sequence weaponizes the very identity of America's most elite military unit, turning the symbol of rescue into another vector of attack. Capture, the devastating turn. Having survived this latest ambush, Banning attempts to drive Asher to the sanctuary of the US Embassy, the one location in London that should represent unambiguous safety, sovereign American territory in the heart of a city that has become a killing field. It's a destination that promises the narrative a moment of respite, a chance for Banning to finally hand off his charge to the full institutional weight of American diplomatic and military protection. The film denies this relief in devastating fashion. Their car is struck before they can reach safety, and in the chaos of the collision and its aftermath, President Asher is taken. This is arguably the film's most crucial plot turn, the moment where Banning's mission transforms from protection into pursuit, from defense into rescue. For a character whose entire identity has been built around unwavering, uncompromising loyalty to the men he's sworn to protect, the capture of Asher represents a profound personal failure, regardless of how thoroughly circumstances beyond his control conspired to bring it about. The audience has watched Banning survive an almost impossible gauntlet of threats throughout the film's runtime specifically to prevent this outcome, and its occurrence anyway, despite his skill, his instincts, his relentless determination, recalibrates the stakes for the film's final act entirely. Banning himself survives the ambush and is subsequently rescued by an SAS extraction team, Britain's own elite special forces unit stepping in where the imposter Delta Force team had failed to deceive him. This rescue provides a crucial narrative pivot point, reconnecting Banning with organized institutional support after an extended stretch of the film in which he and Asher had been operating essentially alone against overwhelming odds. But the rescue comes with an unsettling revelation of its own. The SAS operators suspect that a mole exists somewhere within the British government, someone with access to sensitive security information who has been feeding intelligence to Barkawi's network throughout the operation. This detail deepens the film's exploration of institutional betrayal as a recurring thematic thread. It's not enough that Barkawi's forces have infiltrated London streets disguised as police and guardsmen. The conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of British intelligence itself, suggesting that the attack's uncanny success, its ability to anticipate security protocols, exploit specific vulnerabilities, and coordinate with such devastating precision, required insider knowledge that only someone embedded within the government's own security apparatus could have provided. The rot, the film suggests, doesn't just come from outside, it's been cultivated from within. Following the power, Trumbull's intelligence breakthrough. Back in Washington, Vice President Trumbull's investigative efforts finally yield the breakthrough the film has been building toward. His staff identifies a building owned by one of Barkawi's front companies, a piece of real estate that, on the surface, should be unremarkable, just another node in the sprawling network of shell corporations and business fronts that international arms dealers use to launder money and obscure their operations. What draws attention to this particular building is a detail that speaks to the kind of careful, procedural intelligence work that grounds the film's more explosive sequences in something resembling genuine tradecraft. The building is drawing a massive, anomalous amount of electrical power despite appearing, by all outward indications, to be unoccupied. This is a classic piece of investigative deduction, the kind of detail that a sprawling terrorist operation, however meticulously planned, inevitably leaves behind. Running the kind of technical infrastructure necessary to coordinate a citywide assault, monitor security feeds, and prepare for a live-streamed execution requires resources that don't simply vanish from the grid without a trace. Trumbull's staff connects these dots and deduces, correctly, that this building serves as Cameron's operational headquarters, the nerve center from which the entire London assault has been coordinated and from which Cameron now intends to broadcast President Asher's execution to a global audience. This sequence reinforces the film's structural strategy of alternating between visceral, ground-level action in London and methodical, procedural intelligence work in Washington. Trumbull's contribution to the climax isn't physical heroism in the mold of Banning's constant combat, but the kind of patient, analytical work that ultimately provides the crucial piece of information needed to locate Asher before it's too late. It's a reminder that the film, for all its indulgence in spectacle and violence, still wants to credit institutional competence and intelligence gathering as essential components of counter-terrorism success. A race against live-streamed death. Armed with the location of Cameron's headquarters, Banning launches an infiltration that carries the added urgency of a ticking clock, more literal and horrifying than most action films dare to employ. Cameron is preparing to execute Asher on live coverage, fulfilling Barkawi's earlier promise to broadcast the president's death to the world as the ultimate act of revenge and propaganda. Banning arrives with mere seconds to spare, bursting into the confrontation just before Cameron can complete the execution, a piece of last-second timing that delivers exactly the kind of nail-biting climactic tension the film has been building toward across its entire runtime. This detail, the specific threat of a live-streamed execution, gives the climax a distinctly contemporary edge, tapping into real anxieties about how extremist organizations have adapted to the digital media landscape, using the immediacy and viral reach of live broadcast technology to maximize the psychological and propaganda impact of their violence. It transforms what might otherwise be a straightforward rescue sequence into something with an added layer of horror. Banning isn't just racing to save Asher's life, he's racing to prevent that death from becoming a global spectacle, a piece of terrorist propaganda broadcast into homes around the world in real time. Brotherly betrayal and a desperate escape. The confrontation inside Cameron's headquarters takes an unexpected turn with the introduction of Sultan Mansour, revealed to be Cameron's own brother, whose role in the film's climax delivers one of its more surprising beats. As Banning closes in and the operation collapses around them, Mansour drops a grenade in a final, desperate act before being killed himself, a moment of familial betrayal or perhaps misguided loyalty to the larger cause that costs him his life, even as it creates one final obstacle for Banning to overcome. Cameron, seizing the chaos of the explosion's aftermath, manages to escape the immediate confrontation, denying the audience the clean, direct confrontation between Banning and the operation's on-the-ground mastermind that the narrative had seemingly been building toward. In the grenade's aftermath, Banning is forced into an act that crystallizes everything the film has established about his character. He throws himself between the blast and President Asher, physically shielding the man he's sworn to protect from the explosion's full force. It's a moment of pure, uncomplicated heroism, stripped of any ambiguity or hesitation, the culmination of everything Banning's character has represented throughout both this film and its predecessor. His body becomes, quite literally, the last line of defense between the president and death, a physical manifestation of the Secret Service's core mission rendered in the heightened language of action cinema. The building falls, Banning's contingency plan. Having survived the grenade blast, Banning and Asher make their escape from the building just moments before it's destroyed entirely, not by Cameron's remaining forces or by some external assault, but by an explosive device that Banning himself had strategically planted earlier in the sequence. This detail rewards the same kind of careful, tactical foresight that had earlier led Banning to detect the imposter Delta Force team, reinforcing the character's core competency as a professional who thinks several steps ahead of the chaos unfolding around him. The demolition, coordinated with the SARS's broader assault on the compound, kills Cameron and the remaining terrorist forces still holding the building, delivering a decisive, explosive conclusion to the London-based conflict that has dominated the film's runtime. This climactic destruction serves as a satisfying visual and narrative bookend to the citywide chaos that Cameron's forces unleashed earlier in the film. The building that served as the nerve center of an operation capable of assassinating 5 world leaders and threatening the life of a 6th is reduced to rubble, a literal and symbolic collapse of the network that had, for a harrowing stretch of the film's runtime, seemed capable of achieving its horrifying objectives without meaningful resistance. Unmasking the mole, Marshall's reckoning. With the immediate crisis in Cameron's headquarters resolved, the film turns its attention back to the earlier revelation of a mole embedded within British intelligence. MI6 agent Jacqueline Marshall, who had provided crucial support to Banning and Asher earlier in the film, takes point on helping British authorities restore London's crippled security systems in the aftermath of the assault. In the process of this restoration work, she uncovers definitive proof that MI5 intelligence chief John Lancaster is the mole who has been feeding sensitive information to Barkawi's network throughout the operation. This revelation lands with particular weight given Lancaster's position, not some low-level functionary who might plausibly have been coerced or blackmailed into betrayal, but the head of one of Britain's premier intelligence agencies, a figure who should represent the very pinnacle of institutional trust and national security competence. His betrayal underscores the film's persistent thematic preoccupation with institutional rot and the vulnerability that comes from placing absolute trust in positions of authority without accounting for the possibility of corruption at the highest levels. When Marshall confronts Lancaster and he resists arrest, she kills him, delivering a swift and final resolution to this particular thread of institutional betrayal, one last act of violence that punctuates the film's broader message about the price of complicity, however that complicity was originally purchased or coerced. Barkawi's final reckoning. The film's resolution of its central villain arrives with a haunting symmetry that mirrors the story's opening. Trumbull makes contact with Barkawi one final time, delivering the news that his elaborate, years-in-the-making revenge scheme has ultimately failed. His son is dead, his network dismantled, his hostage rescued, and his carefully orchestrated moment of live-streamed triumph reduced to nothing. Moments after receiving this news, another drone strike, the same weapon of remote, clinical warfare that killed his family 2 years earlier and set this entire chain of events into motion, ends Barkawi's life for good. This closing of the loop carries a weight that the film, to its credit, allows to linger without excessive commentary. Barkawi's story begins and ends with a drone strike, a method of warfare that kills from a distance, anonymously, without the kind of direct human confrontation that might allow for negotiation, surrender, or mercy. The film doesn't explicitly interrogate the irony of using the exact same tactic that radicalized him in the first place to finally eliminate him, but the parallel structure speaks for itself to any attentive viewer, a cycle of violence that begins and ends with the same cold, remote instrument of death, suggesting an unbroken chain of retaliation that the narrative implies, whether intentionally or not, may simply continue in some form beyond the frame of this particular story. Coming Home, an epilogue of healing. The film's final movement shifts decisively away from spectacle and toward quiet domestic resolution. 2 weeks after the catastrophic events in London, the story finds Banning home with his wife Leah and their newborn child, a daughter named Lynn, a name chosen in direct tribute to Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs, whose death in the Marine One crash earlier in the film represented one of the narrative's most significant losses. This naming choice provides a poignant note of continuity and remembrance, ensuring that Jacobs's sacrifice isn't simply forgotten amid the celebration of the mission's ultimate success, but is instead woven permanently into Banning's own family, carried forward in the next generation. The film's closing scene finds Banning in a moment of quiet reflection, drafting a resignation letter, a natural culmination of the exhaustion, trauma, and accumulated cost of a career spent absorbing violence and loss in service of protecting others. It's an entirely understandable impulse. After everything he's endured across 2 films, the deaths he's witnessed, the toll exacted on his body and his family life, walking away seems like the only reasonable choice for a man who has more than earned his rest. Every franchise built around a singular protagonist lives or dies by the charisma and physicality of the actor carrying it, and London Has Fallen owes its very existence to Gerard Butler's continued commitment to Mike Banning, the Secret Service agent and former Army Ranger whose specific military pedigree, service with the elite Regimental Reconnaissance Company, provides the character's combat competence with a plausible, if heightened, real-world foundation. Butler's casting in this role, first established in Olympus Has Fallen, represented something of a career reinvention for the Scottish actor, who had spent the preceding decade oscillating between romantic leads and prestige-adjacent dramatic work without ever quite finding the singular vehicle that would define his commercial appeal in the way that action franchises had defined careers for actors like Bruce Willis or Sylvester Stallone in earlier decades. What makes Butler's performance as Banning work, even amid a film that critics widely panned for its excesses, is his commitment to grounding the character's near-superhuman feats of violence in something resembling genuine physical and emotional exhaustion. Banning isn't written or performed as a character who enjoys the carnage he leaves in his wake. Butler plays him with a perpetual weariness, a man whose competence has become inseparable from a kind of resigned fatalism about the violence his job demands. This is crucial to the character's function within the franchise's internal logic. The audience needs to believe that Banning's violence is reluctant, born of necessity rather than appetite, even as the film's direction and editing choices often revel in the choreography of his kills with an enthusiasm that sits in some tension with that characterization. Butler's physical commitment to the role deserves particular recognition. The character requires an actor capable of convincingly executing an extended, punishing gauntlet of hand-to-hand combat, gunplay, vehicular chaos, and explosive set pieces across the film's runtime, and Butler brings a credible physicality to every sequence, aided by direction that generally favors visceral, ground-level combat choreography over the more stylized, waifu aesthetics that had come to dominate much of the action genre by 2016. There's an old-fashioned quality to Butler's performance, a throwback to the kind of unpretentious, muscular leading man energy that defined action cinema before the genre became increasingly dominated by superhero spectacle, and it's precisely that throwback quality that has allowed Banning to become one of the more durable action protagonists of the 2010s. Aaron Eckhart's return as President Benjamin Asher provides the film with its essential emotional counterweight to Butler's relentless physicality. Eckhart, an actor with a well-established capacity for projecting both authority and vulnerability, qualities he'd previously demonstrated in prestige work like Thank You for Smoking and blockbuster fare like The Dark Knight, brings a lived-in gravitas to Asher that elevates what could easily have been a thankless, reactive role into a genuine partnership with Butler's Banning. The Banning-Asher dynamic is arguably the emotional core of the entire franchise, and Eckhart's performance understands precisely what that relationship requires: a president who is neither a helpless victim requiring constant rescue nor an implausible action hero in his own right, but rather a man whose intelligence, resolve, and hard-won trust in Banning allow the two characters to function as genuine collaborators in survival rather than simply protector and protected. Eckhart brings physical presence to the role as well, conveying Asher's exhaustion and fear across a grueling ordeal without ever allowing the character to become passive or forgettable amid the chaos surrounding him. There's a specific quality of dignity under duress that Eckhart channels throughout the film, a president determined to comport himself with a measure of composure and moral clarity even as the world collapses around him, which lends the character's survival a sense of earned significance rather than mere plot necessity. The voice of institutional authority, Morgan Freeman as Alan Trumbull. Few actors in contemporary cinema carry the kind of instant, almost mythic authority that Morgan Freeman brings to any role requiring gravitas, and his portrayal of Vice President Alan Trumbull leveraged that quality to its fullest extent. Freeman's voice alone, measured, resonant, imbued with decades of iconic screen presence, lends every scene set within the Washington Situation Room a sense of institutional weight that helps ground the film's more explosive London-based sequences within a broader, coherent structure of governmental response. Freeman's performance is understated by design. Trumbull isn't a character defined by physical action but by strategic thinking, moral clarity, and the burden of decision-making under extraordinary pressure. This is territory Freeman has occupied with distinction throughout his career, from his work in Deep Impact to his recurring presence across the Dark Knight trilogy, and his casting here taps directly into that accumulated cultural association between his screen persona and images of calm, competent leadership during crisis. The character's trajectory within this specific installment, investigating the attack, making direct contact with the film's villain, and ultimately overseeing the operation that finds and rescues the president, positions Trumbull as the film's steady moral center, a counterbalance to both the chaos in London and the coldness of Barkawi's calculated revenge. A villain rooted in grievance, a lone Monia Baobal as Amir Barkawi. The role of Amir Barkawi, the Pakistani international arms trafficker and terrorist mastermind ranked 6th on the FBI's most wanted terrorists list, falls to a lone Monia Baobal, an Israeli actor tasked with the difficult challenge of humanizing a character whose actions across the film's runtime are almost uniformly monstrous. Baobal's performance works hardest in the film's margins, in the wedding sequence that opens the film, before Barkawi becomes purely an instrument of vengeance, and in his later phone conversations with Trumbull, where the actor's controlled, almost weary delivery suggests a man for whom the elaborate revenge scheme has become less a matter of ideological conviction than an all-consuming, almost mechanical pursuit of retribution. This is a role that invites legitimate scrutiny regarding how the film constructs its central antagonist, and Baobal's performance can only do so much to complicate a screenplay that ultimately positions Barkawi as an existential threat to be eliminated rather than a figure whose grievances merit sustained engagement. Still, within those constraints, Baobal brings a specific gravity to the character, avoiding the more cartoonish villainy that could have flattened Barkawi into pure spectacle, and instead grounding him in the calculated patience of a man who has spent 2 years meticulously engineering a moment of retribution against the powers he holds responsible for his family's death. Institutional backbone, Angela Bassett as Lynn Jacobs. Angela Bassett's casting as Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs brings an actor of considerable dramatic pedigree to a role that, while ultimately limited by the character's fate within the narrative, benefits enormously from Bassett's innate authority and screen presence. Bassett has built a career on portraying figures of formidable competence and inner strength, from her Oscar-nominated turn in What's Love Got to Do With It to her extensive genre work across franchises like Mission Impossible and the American Horror Story anthology series, and she brings that same commanding presence to Jacobs. Jacobs functions within the film's early sections as a figure of institutional order and professional competence, someone whose judgment and authority Banning respects and defers to even as his own instincts occasionally diverge from official protocol. Bassett imbues these scenes with a sense of lived authority, making Jacobs feel like a genuine career professional rather than a functionary inserted purely for expository purposes. Her death during the Marine One crash in Hyde Park represents one of the film's most significant emotional losses, a moment made more impactful precisely because Bassett had established Jacobs as a character of substance in her limited screen time. The film's decision to have Banning name his newborn daughter after her in the closing scene serves as a testament to how effectively Bassett's performance registered with the film's creative team, warranting that lasting tribute within the narrative itself. The military establishment, Robert Foster as General Edward Clegg. Robert Foster, an actor whose career spans decades and includes a celebrated career resurgence following his Oscar-nominated performance in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, brings his characteristic weathered gravitas to the role of General Edward Clegg, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Foster's presence within the Washington Situation Room scenes contributes to the ensemble of governmental authority figures grappling with the unfolding crisis, his character representing the military establishment's perspective within the broader crisis response apparatus depicted throughout the film's Washington set sequences. Foster's naturally commanding screen presence, honed across a career that includes iconic roles in films like Medium Cool and an extensive body of television work, lends Clegg an air of seasoned authority appropriate to a character whose military judgment carries significant weight during the crisis. Behind the scenes of power, Jackie Earle Haley and Melissa Leo. Jackie Earle Haley, an actor whose career has spanned from his early breakout in the 1970s through a notable career revival beginning with his Oscar-nominated performance in Little Children, portrays White House Deputy Chief of Staff D.C. Mason. Haley has built a reputation for bringing intensity and idiosyncratic character work to roles across a wide range of genres, from his unforgettable turn as Freddy Krueger in the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street remake to his work in prestige projects like Watchmen, and his presence within the Washington Ensemble adds another layer of texture to the film's depiction of governmental crisis management. Melissa Leo, an Academy Award winner for her performance in The Fighter, brings considerable dramatic credibility to the role of Defense Secretary Ruth McMillan. Leo's casting represents the kind of prestige-adjacent talent that action franchises frequently recruit for supporting roles, lending scenes of governmental deliberation and added weight through her performance history and reputation for nuanced, committed character work. Her presence within the Situation Room scenes, alongside Freeman, Foster, and Haley, helps construct a believable ensemble of American governmental authority grappling with an unprecedented crisis, each actor bringing their own accumulated screen credibility to bear on roles that, while limited in individual screen time, collectively establish the institutional backdrop against which Banning's ground-level heroics play out. The domestic anchor, Rada Mitchell as Leah Banning. Rada Mitchell's portrayal of Leah Banning, Mike's wife, provides the film with its most direct emotional through-line connecting Banning's professional ordeal to his personal stakes. Mitchell, an Australian actress with a substantial body of work across both independent and studio films, brings warmth and quiet strength to a role that, structurally, exists primarily to humanize Banning's motivations and raise the emotional stakes of his survival. The character's pregnancy throughout the film's events, and the couple's eventual welcoming of their daughter in the film's closing scenes, gives Mitchell's limited screen time an outsized emotional resonance. She represents the domestic future Banning is fighting to survive for, the tangible reason his character's relentless heroics carry genuine personal stakes beyond professional duty alone. The intelligence apparatus, Sean O'Brien as Ray Monroe. Sean O'Brien rounds out the American governmental ensemble as NSA Deputy Director Ray Monroe, contributing to the intelligence-gathering thread that runs parallel to the film's action sequences. O'Brien, a character actor with an extensive body of television and film work, brings professional credibility to a role that represents the technical, surveillance-oriented dimension of the crisis response, working alongside Trumbull's team to help track down the information that ultimately leads to locating both Asher's captors and the mole operating within British intelligence. The subcommander, Waleed Zuwaiter as Cameron Barkawi. As Cameron Barkawi, Amir's son and the operational subcommander executing his father's revenge plot on the ground in London, Waleed Zuwaiter takes on the film's primary hands-on antagonist role, the character whose direct confrontations with Banning drive much of the film's climactic tension. Zuwaiter, an actor of Palestinian and Kuwaiti heritage with a substantial career spanning both film and television, brings a cold, methodical intensity to Cameron, portraying a character who has clearly been shaped by his father's ideology and grief into a capable, ruthless field commander. The dynamic between Cameron and his brother Sultan Mansour in the film's climax adds a layer of familial complexity to the character, suggesting fractures within Barkawi's operation that extend even to his own children. And Zuwaiter's performance across the film's escalating action sequences provides Banning with a worthy direct adversary whose eventual death in the climactic building demolition delivers the narrative's most direct personal reckoning. A new ally, Charlotte Riley as Jacqueline Marshall. Charlotte Riley's portrayal of MI6 agent Jacqueline Jax Marshall introduces a crucial British intelligence perspective into a narrative that might otherwise have remained entirely centered on American characters navigating a foreign crisis. Riley, an English actress with a strong background in both film and prestige television work, brings competence and a grounded professionalism to Marshall, a character who becomes an essential ally to Banning and Asher during their most isolated and vulnerable stretch within the London Underground and subsequent safe house sequences. Marshall's role in briefing the protagonists, facilitating communication with Trumbull's team in Washington, and ultimately uncovering the mole within British intelligence positions her as a vital bridge between the film's British and American institutional perspectives, and Riley's performance lends the character a credible sense of professional capability without ever feeling like a mere plot device inserted to service the narrative's needs. Colin Salmon, an actor whose statuesque presence and commanding voice have made him a recognizable face across British film and television, including a notable run playing a recurring character across multiple James Bond films, brings authority to the role of Sir Kevin Hazard, credited within the film as Chief of the Metropolitan Police despite his official title being Commissioner. Salmon's presence lends the depiction of London's law enforcement response an appropriate sense of institutional gravity, representing the perspective of British domestic security forces grappling with an assault that specifically exploited trust in their own uniformed personnel, a particularly painful irony for a character in his position to navigate. Special Forces Precision, Brian Larkin as Will Davies. Rounding out the principal cast, Brian Larkin portrays SAS Commander Will Davies, the leader of the British Special Forces extraction team that ultimately rescues Banning and plays a crucial role in the film's climactic assault on Cameron's headquarters. Larkin, a Northern Irish actor with experience across both film and television action projects, brings a disciplined, professional bearing to Davies, embodying the elite competence associated with Britain's Special Air Service. His character's suspicion regarding a potential mole within British intelligence introduces an important plot thread that pays off in Marshall's later discovery of Lancaster's betrayal, and Larkin's performance throughout the film's climactic sequences provides a capable counterpart to Banning's more improvisational heroics, representing the kind of coordinated, institutional military competence that ultimately combines with Banning's individual initiative to bring the crisis to its resolution. An ensemble in service of spectacle. Taken as a whole, the cast of London Has Fallen represents a fascinating study in how contemporary action blockbusters assemble their ensembles, blending a bankable lead in Butler with an array of respected, often award-decorated character actors filling out supporting roles that, while individually limited in screen time, collectively lend the film's sprawling geopolitical narrative a sense of institutional credibility and dramatic texture. Freeman, Bassett, Foster, Leo, and Haley bring the accumulated weight of distinguished careers to the Washington set scenes, while Riley, Salmon, and Larkin ground the film's British perspective with performers capable of conveying genuine professional competence amid unprecedented crisis. Eckhart provides Butler's Banning with a genuine partner rather than a mere charge to be protected, while Bowell and Zuater work to give the film's antagonists a dimension of coherent motivation. However incompletely, the screenplay ultimately develops that potential. It's an ensemble assembled with clear every film that trades on the visual authenticity of a real, recognizable city faces an inherent tension between the practical realities of international filmmaking and the audience's desire to see genuine landmarks under assault. For London Has Fallen, that tension resolved itself into a genuinely ambitious, multinational production strategy that began, appropriately enough, exactly where the story demanded, in London itself. Principal photography commenced on October 24, 2014, marking the official start of a shoot that would eventually stretch across continents before wrapping the following spring. This decision to root the production's earliest work in the actual city the film's title invokes speaks to a fundamental filmmaking instinct. However extensively visual effects and international substitute locations might later be employed to complete the picture, there's no substitute for capturing at least some footage of actors moving through the genuine geography of London streets, its distinctive architecture, and its unmistakable urban texture. This opening phase of production was structured around a specific, disciplined schedule, for weeks of dedicated shooting time, deliberately timed to conclude before a break for the Christmas holiday season. This kind of scheduling reflects the practical realities that govern any production of this scale, particularly one working with a substantial ensemble cast whose individual availability had to be coordinated across a demanding production calendar. Rather than attempting to power through the entire shoot in one continuous, grueling stretch, the filmmakers built in a natural pause point, allowing cast and crew a holiday respite before resuming the considerable work still ahead. The Washington contingent arrives first. Notably, this initial 4-week London shoot involved primarily the actors whose characters operate within the film's Washington, D.C. set scenes: Morgan Freeman, Aaron Eckhart, Angela Bassett, and Melissa Leo. At first glance, this might seem like a curious sequencing choice. Why would the actors playing characters based in the American capital be among the first to film in London? The answer lies in the practical mechanics of international production, where the geographic setting of a scene within the story often bears little relationship to where that scene is actually shot. Interior sets depicting the White House Situation Room, presidential briefing spaces, or other Washington-based locations can be constructed on sound stages anywhere in the world, and it made considerable logistical and financial sense to build and shoot those interior American sequences at British production facilities rather than attempting to replicate that infrastructure across multiple international locations. This detail offers a small but illuminating window into how blockbuster productions actually function behind the scenes, defying the intuitive assumption that a film's shooting locations map neatly onto its narrative geography. The Washington set sequences that punctuate the film, providing crucial expository and strategic counterpoint to the chaos unfolding on London streets, were brought to life not in any American capital but within British studio facilities, staffed by a production team executing Christian Gudegeist and his fellow writers' vision of a fractured, dual-continent crisis response. Somerset House itself carries a rich history as a filming location, having hosted productions across numerous genres over the decades thanks to its grand neoclassical architecture and its flexibility in standing in for a variety of settings, from Regency-era period pieces to contemporary thrillers. Its selection for London has continues that tradition, adding another credit to a building that has become something of a fixture within the British film industry's location repertoire, while simultaneously serving the specific narrative purpose the story required, a suitably grand, recognizable setting appropriate for a sequence involving the arrival of the President of the United States ahead of a state funeral. Pinewood Studios, the technical backbone. Beyond location shooting across London's actual streets and landmarks, the production made extensive use of Pinewood Studios, one of the most storied and technically sophisticated filmmaking facilities in the world. Pinewood's reputation within the industry is difficult to overstate. The studio complex has served as a production base for an extraordinary range of major franchises over the decades, most famously the James Bond series, alongside countless other blockbuster productions requiring the kind of extensive soundstage space, technical infrastructure, and skilled crew base that facilities of Pinewood's caliber provide. For a production of London Has Fallen's ambition, access to Pinewood's resources would have been essential to executing the film's more elaborate action sequences and interior sets. Studio-based filming allows for the kind of controlled environment necessary to stage complex stunt work, pyrotechnics, and choreographed combat sequences that would be impractical or prohibitively disruptive to execute on London's actual, functioning streets. The various safe houses, government facilities, and other interior spaces that populate the film's narrative likely found their physical form on Pinewood sound stages, constructed by production designers and art departments working to translate the screenplay's vision of a city in crisis into tangible, filmable sets. An unexpected detour to India. One of the more surprising details regarding the film's production geography comes directly from Gerard Butler himself, who revealed in an interview that portions of the movie were filmed in India, with production slated to continue afterward in Bulgaria. This revelation adds an intriguing layer of complexity to understanding the film's actual production footprint, suggesting a shooting schedule considerably more geographically dispersed than the film's ostensibly London and Washington-focused narrative might initially suggest to audiences unfamiliar with the practical realities of international action filmmaking. The specific reasons a production might incorporate Indian filming locations into a story ostensibly set entirely within London and the fictional international response emanating from Washington can vary considerably. Sometimes such decisions reflect the pursuit of specific visual textures or architectural elements not readily available elsewhere, sometimes they are driven by practical considerations around cost, crew availability, or specialized production capabilities, and sometimes they involve capturing specific sequences that required particular environmental conditions or settings that could be more efficiently or affordably achieved through Indian production infrastructure rather than remaining confined entirely to British or Eastern European facilities. Whatever the specific creative or logistical calculus behind this choice, Butler's candid acknowledgement of the Indian filming component offers a valuable reminder that the polished geographic coherence audiences experience on screen, the sense that they are watching events unfold specifically in London, often masks a considerably more scattered and pragmatic production reality behind the camera. Bulgaria, a presidential visit to the set. The production's next major destination, as indicated by Butler's comments, was Bulgaria, specifically the Boyana Film Studios located near Sofia. This choice reflects a well-established pattern within contemporary international filmmaking, where Eastern European production facilities, and Bulgaria's Boyana Studios in particular, have become increasingly popular destinations for major international productions seeking cost-effective access to sophisticated soundstage facilities, skilled local crews, and favorable production incentives, all while maintaining the technical capacity to execute large-scale action and effects work. What makes the Bulgarian leg of production particularly noteworthy is the remarkable detail that Rosen Plevneliev, who was serving as president of Bulgaria at the time, personally visited the London Has Fallen set during filming at Boyana Film Studios. This kind of high-level governmental attention to a foreign film production speaks to the broader economic and cultural significance that international productions can carry for host countries, particularly for a nation like Bulgaria that has worked strategically over the years to position itself as an attractive destination for major international film and television productions. A sitting head of state taking the time to visit a working film set represents a notable form of validation and public relations opportunity, both for the Bulgarian film industry seeking to showcase its production capabilities to a global audience, and for the production itself, which gained a moment of international news coverage and diplomatic goodwill from the visit. There's a layer of thematic resonance worth noting in this detail, even if entirely coincidental to the production's practical needs, a film centrally concerned with the vulnerability and symbolic importance of world leaders gathering in one place, whose plot hinges on a security apparatus attempting to protect visiting heads of state from catastrophic attack, found itself hosting an actual president on its set during production. It's the kind of detail that underscores how thoroughly questions of political leadership, security, and international relations threaded through not just the film's narrative content but even the circumstances of its physical production. A production spanning continents and seasons. Taken together, this account of the film's shooting locations reveals a production of genuinely impressive geographic scope. Principal photography launched in London in October 2014, continued at Pinewood Studios for interior and effects-heavy work, extended to India for reasons Butler's interview leaves somewhat unspecified, and then moved on to Bulgaria's Boyana Film Studios, all before the production wrapped in April 2015, encompassing roughly 6 months of principal photography spread across at least 4 distinct national production environments. This kind of multi-continental shooting schedule reflects the increasingly globalized nature of contemporary blockbuster filmmaking, where major productions routinely chase the optimal combination of location authenticity, production incentives, technical infrastructure, and cost efficiency across multiple countries rather than confining themselves to a single centralized production base. For a film whose narrative is explicitly concerned with global crisis and international cooperation, the G7 leaders gathering, intelligence services coordinating across national boundaries, a Washington command center directing a rescue operation unfolding thousands of miles away in London, there's a certain appropriateness to a production process that similarly spanned multiple nations and cultures to bring that story to the screen. The film's fictional narrative of international coordination in response to crisis finds an unexpected mirror in the very real, considerably less dramatic but equally complex logistics of coordinating cast, crew, equipment, and production infrastructure across London, Pinewood, India, and Bulgaria over the course of half a year. The practical realities of blockbuster geography. This production history also offers useful context for understanding how audiences should approach the visual geography presented within the finished film. While London Has Fallen clearly invested significant effort and resources into capturing genuine London locations, the sequences at Somerset House being a clear example of location authenticity serving a specific narrative purpose, the reality of the production reveals that much of what audiences perceive as London on screen was likely constructed through a combination of genuine location footage, extensive Pinewood soundstage work, and visual effects work designed to seamlessly blend footage captured across radically different physical locations into a coherent, unified sense of place. This isn't a criticism unique to London Has Fallen, it's simply the standard operating reality of how contemporary blockbuster action films achieve their scale and spectacle while managing production budgets and logistical constraints. Very few films depicting citywide catastrophe and destruction on the scale this story requires could plausibly execute their entire production within the actual city being depicted, both for practical reasons. One simply cannot realistically stage explosions, gunfights, and vehicular chaos across genuinely occupied, functioning London streets without extraordinary disruption, and for financial ones, given how dramatically production costs can vary between different national film industries and their respective incentive structures. Christmas break and the rhythm of production. The detail regarding the planned break for Christmas during the initial 4-week London shooting phase offers a small but humanizing glimpse into the actual working rhythms of major film production, a reminder that even a project of this scale and ambition remains subject to the practical realities of cast and crew needing rest, holiday time with family, and a natural pause point within an otherwise demanding shooting schedule. Major productions frequently structure their calendars around such breaks, both out of basic consideration for the well-being of everyone involved in the exhausting, physically and logistically demanding work of feature filmmaking, and because natural breaks in shooting schedules can provide valuable opportunities for the production to regroup, assess progress, and prepare for subsequent phases of work, in this case, the eventual continuation of shooting that would carry the production through India, Bulgaria, and ultimately to its conclusion in April 2015. A testament to modern action filmmaking's global reach. Ultimately, the production history of London Has Fallen stands as an illuminating case study in the genuinely international character of contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. What audiences experience as a tightly focused narrative unfolding almost entirely within a single, unified fictional London was, in reality, assembled from footage captured across London's actual streets and landmarks, the sound stages of Pinewood Studios, locations in India, and the facilities of Boyana Film Studios in Bulgaria, complete with a notable visit from Bulgaria's sitting president, a small but memorable footnote within the broader production history. This 6-month journey across continents, structured around the practical demands of coordinating a substantial ensemble cast and executing the technically demanding action sequences the story required, exemplifies exactly the kind of complex, globally distributed production infrastructure that has become standard practice for action franchises operating at this scale in the modern film industry, a fitting behind. This kind of sub-label strategy is a familiar maneuver within the film industry, allowing a studio to maintain distinct brand identities for different categories of content, ensuring that genre-specific releases can be marketed and positioned in ways tailored to their target audiences without diluting or complicating the reputation of the parent studio's primary label. Focus Features had built considerable prestige through association with awards-caliber filmmaking, and creating a dedicated vehicle for genre content allowed the studio to pursue commercially driven action and horror projects without those releases necessarily being read as a departure from Focus's established creative identity. London Has Fallen held a position of genuine significance within this corporate restructuring, standing as one of Gramercy's first titles under its revived incarnation. This meant the film carried an additional layer of institutional importance beyond simply being a sequel capitalizing on the modest success of Olympus Has Fallen. It was also, in effect, a flagship release meant to help establish and validate this newly relaunched distribution label within the marketplace. Whatever pressures typically accompany a sequel expected to build on its predecessor's box office performance were compounded here by the additional expectation that the film would help demonstrate Gramercy's viability as a distinct commercial force within Focus Features' broader release strategy. A release date in flux, the first move. Initially, London Has Fallen was slated for an October 2, 2015 theatrical release, a date that would have positioned the film within the early autumn box office corridor, a period that action and thriller releases have historically used with reasonable success, offering a window after the crowded summer blockbuster season but before the more prestige-focused awards contenders typically begin dominating multiplex attention heading into the winter months. This initial positioning suggests a studio confident in the film's ability to capture audience attention during a comparatively less congested release window. That confidence, however, was short-lived. On June 12, 2015, just 3 weeks after the Gramercy relaunch announcement, it was revealed that the film had been pushed back significantly, from its original October date to January 22, 2016, a shift of nearly 4 months. The specific rationale behind this move illuminates the intensely competitive and strategically calculated nature of major studio release scheduling. The shift was made explicitly to avoid direct competition with The Martian, Ridley Scott's acclaimed science fiction survival drama starring Matt Damon, which had itself just undergone a release date shuffle, swapping its original November 25 slot with another film, Victor Frankenstein. This kind of release date chess match happens with more regularity than most casual moviegoers realize, as studios continuously monitor and react to competitors' scheduling decisions, attempting to avoid placing films with potentially overlapping target audiences into direct head-to-head competition for the same theatrical weekend. The Martian, as a big-budget science fiction spectacle with major star power and awards aspirations, represented exactly the kind of high-profile competition that could meaningfully cannibalize London Has Fallen's opening weekend audience and box office performance had the two films remained scheduled in close proximity. Moving London Has Fallen to the following January represented a strategic retreat to a comparatively less congested release window, sacrificing the potentially higher traffic autumn corridor in exchange for reduced direct competition, a classic risk calculation trade-off that studios navigate constantly throughout a film's pre-release marketing and positioning process. An unforeseen controversy, timing and tragedy. What followed this initial rescheduling announcement was a controversy that neither the studio nor the filmmakers likely anticipated when they made their scheduling calculations based primarily on competitive positioning against other releases. The newly announced January 22, 2016 release date drew sharp criticism from Philip Nelson, chair of the Tavistock Square Memorial Trust, an organization dedicated to commemorating the victims of a specific and deeply painful chapter in London's recent history. Nelson's objection centered on the fact that this release timing coincided with the week marking the 10th anniversary of the 7th of July, 2005 London bombings, the coordinated terrorist attacks on London's public transportation system that killed 52 people and injured hundreds more, an atrocity that remains one of the most significant and painful terrorist incidents in modern British history. The prospect of a Hollywood action blockbuster explicitly built around the premise of coordinated terrorist attacks devastating London opening in theatres during the very week commemorating the 10th anniversary of a real terrorist attack that devastated London struck Nelson, and presumably many others connected to the memorial community, as a profoundly insensitive scheduling coincidence, regardless of whether the timing had been deliberately calculated or represented pure happenstance arising from competitive positioning against other studio releases. This criticism gained additional weight and complexity when considered alongside a second point of controversy Nelson raised. The release timing also coincided with the aftermath of the 2015 Sousse attacks, a terrorist assault that had occurred in Tunisia earlier that year, in which 30 British nationals were among those killed. This attack, targeting British tourists specifically, represented another recent and painful loss for British families and communities, adding a second layer of real-world terrorist tragedy that the film's fictional premise of a coordinated, large-scale terrorist assault risked appearing to trivialize or exploit for entertainment purposes, however unintentionally, through poor scheduling timing. This controversy illuminates a recurring tension within the action and thriller genre more broadly. Films that use terrorism as their central dramatic engine inevitably risk colliding with the real-world sensitivities and lived trauma of audiences and communities who have experienced actual terrorist violence. A film like London Has Fallen, which stages an elaborate, spectacular terrorist assault against London specifically, was always going to carry some inherent risk of this kind of criticism given the very real history of terrorist violence the city has experienced. But the specific scheduling collision with both the 7/7 bombing anniversary and the Sousse attacks aftermath crystallized that latent tension into an explicit, public controversy that the studio was forced to reckon with, whether or not the January release date ultimately would have proceeded as originally planned. A second delay, visual effects and practical necessity. As it turned out, the January 22, 2016 release date would not be the film's final resting place on the release calendar. On September 16, 2015, a further announcement pushed the release date back once again, this time to March 4, 2016, the date the film would ultimately, finally reach theaters. Unlike the earlier rescheduling, which was explicitly tied to competitive positioning against The Martian, this second delay was attributed to a more mundane but entirely understandable production reality. The studio required additional time to complete the film's visual effects work. This kind of delay is exceedingly common within the modern blockbuster filmmaking landscape, where the technical demands of large-scale visual effects, particularly for a film requiring the kind of extensive digital augmentation necessary to convincingly depict London's actual landmarks under sustained, spectacular assault, routinely require more time than initial production schedules anticipate. Visual effects work sits at the intersection of technical artistry and enormous logistical complexity, involving teams of artists across potentially multiple effects houses working to seamlessly integrate practical footage, digital destruction, environmental augmentation, and countless other technical elements into a finished product that needs to withstand the scrutiny of audiences increasingly sophisticated in their ability to spot substandard or rushed effects work. Given that London Has Fallen's narrative hinges so centrally on the visual spectacle of London's iconic landmarks and infrastructure being damaged and destroyed across an extended, escalating series of action sequences, it's entirely reasonable that the studio would prioritize taking additional time to ensure this crucial visual component met an acceptable quality bar rather than rushing the film to meet a release date that might have compromised the finished effects work's polish and believability. Whether this additional 6-week delay ultimately resulted in visual effects work that satisfied critics, many of whom, as noted in broader discussions of the film's critical reception, found plenty else to criticize about the finished product regardless of the technical execution of its effect sequences, remains a separate question from the practical necessity that drove this particular scheduling decision. There's a certain irony worth noting in how this second delay effectively resolved, at least incidentally, the controversy Nelson and others had raised regarding the January release date's proximity to the 7/7 bombing anniversary and the Sousse attacks. By pushing the release to March, the studio inadvertently created distance from those specific commemorative dates, even though the stated rationale for the change centered entirely on visual effects completion timelines rather than any explicit acknowledgement of the sensitivity concerns that had been publicly raised. Whether the controversy played any unstated role in the studio's calculus alongside the visual effects justification is impossible to determine definitively from the public record, but the practical effect was the same regardless of the studio's precise internal reasoning. The long road to theaters. Considered as a whole, this journey from the film's original October 2015 target through two subsequent delays to its eventual March 2016 release illustrates just how volatile and contingent theatrical release dates can be for major studio productions, subject to constant recalibration based on competitive positioning, production readiness, and, in this particular instance, an unforeseen collision with real-world historical sensitivity that neither the studio nor filmmakers had apparently anticipated when initially setting the schedule. A 5-month journey from the original planned release to the eventual theatrical debut, encompassing two separate rescheduling announcements driven by entirely different underlying factors, speaks to the complex, multifaceted decision-making process that governs when and how a major studio release ultimately reaches its audience. For a film built around fictionalized terrorist violence targeting one of the world's most historically significant cities, the controversy surrounding its original January release date serves as a pointed reminder that action cinema's use of real-world anxieties as narrative fuel, a tension already present in critical discussions regarding the film's handling of its villain's backstory and its broader depiction of terrorism and Middle Eastern characters, extends beyond the content of the film itself into the practical realities of how and when that content reaches audiences. Release timing, ordinarily a matter of pure competitive and logistical calculation within the film industry, became for this particular film a matter of genuine public sensitivity requiring the studio to navigate a level of scrutiny that extended well beyond typical box office positioning concerns. Bringing the chaos home, the Blu-ray and DVD release. Following its theatrical run, which as established elsewhere delivered a commercially successful $205.9 million worldwide gross despite the largely negative critical reception the film received, London Has Fallen completed the standard distribution life cycle familiar to virtually all major studio releases of this era, a home media release bringing the film to physical formats for purchase and home viewing. The film arrived on both Blu-ray and DVD on June 14, 2016, roughly 3.5 months after its theatrical debut, a gap consistent with typical industry windowing practices of the period, which generally aim to preserve a period of theatrical exclusivity before opening up additional revenue streams through home media sales and rental. This home media release represented an important secondary phase of the film's commercial life, extending its earning potential and audience reach well beyond the theatrical run itself. For a film explicitly designed around large-scale spectacle, coordinated citywide terrorist assaults, landmark destruction, aerial combat sequences, and extensive practical and digital effects work, the home media format offered audiences the opportunity to revisit and appreciate these technically ambitious sequences in a home viewing environment, potentially with the kind of high-fidelity audio and visual reproduction that Blu-ray technology specifically was designed to showcase for exactly this type of effects-heavy, sonically aggressive action content. The June 2016 home media release also positioned the film to reach the broader, more casual audience segment that action franchises particularly rely upon for their long-term commercial sustainability, viewers who may not have prioritized a theatrical viewing but who would readily rent or purchase the film for home consumption, particularly fans of the broader action genre or of Gerard Butler's specific filmography who had perhaps missed the theatrical window but remained interested in catching up with the sequel to Olympus Has Fallen before the franchise's eventual continuation with Angel Has Fallen 3 years later. A release history reflecting the complexities of modern blockbuster distribution. Taken in its entirety, the release history of London Has Fallen offers a genuinely instructive window into the multifaceted, often unpredictable process through which major studio action films actually reach their audiences. What might appear from the outside as a straightforward theatrical release, a film simply arriving in cinemas on its announced date, instead reveals a considerably more complicated journey, a new distribution label seeking to establish its commercial footing, a competitive rescheduling maneuver to avoid direct box office competition with a major science fiction release, an unforeseen controversy rooted in the painful collision between fictional terrorist spectacle and genuine historical tragedy, and finally a practical delay driven by the technical demands of completing effects work to an acceptable standard. Each of these factors, individually unremarkable within the broader context of studio filmmaking practices, combine to create a release journey considerably more eventful and contested than the film's eventual theatrical performance might suggest to audiences unfamiliar with this behind-the-scenes history. The controversy specifically raised by Philip Nelson and the Tavistock Square Memorial Trust stands as a particularly significant footnote within this history, a reminder that films trading on fictionalized terrorist violence for entertainment purposes inevitably exist in conversation, whether intentionally or not, with the real-world history and ongoing trauma of actual terrorist attacks. A tension that in an industry where sequels are perpetually expected to outperform their predecessors as a baseline condition of their own existence, London Has Fallen delivered exactly the kind of financial validation that studios crave when greenlighting a follow-up to a modestly successful original. The film's final worldwide tally settled at $205.8 million, a figure assembled from $62.7 million earned within North America and a considerably larger $143.2 million generated across international territories. Set against a production budget of $60 million, this represents a return multiple that, by any reasonable Hollywood accounting standard, qualifies as a genuine commercial success, the kind of profitability ratio that studios build entire release slates around, particularly for mid-budget action fare that doesn't carry the astronomical marketing and production costs associated with the era's biggest tentpole franchises. What makes this financial outcome particularly noteworthy is the direct comparison to its predecessor. London Has Fallen didn't merely match Olympus Has Fallen's commercial performance, it decisively outgrossed it, surpassing the original film's worldwide total of $170 million by a substantial margin. This kind of sequel-over-original growth is far from guaranteed within the franchise filmmaking landscape. Plenty of sequels underperform their predecessors, particularly when critical reception sours noticeably from one installment to the next, as it demonstrably did across the Has Fallen franchise's first two entries. That London Has Fallen managed to grow its box office footprint despite facing a wave of negative reviews considerably harsher than those that greeted Olympus Has Fallen speaks to something important about the film's underlying commercial appeal and the loyalty of the audience base it had cultivated. Reading the international numbers, a global appetite for spectacle. The specific breakdown between domestic and international box office performance tells its own compelling story about where London Has Fallen found its most enthusiastic audience. With international territories contributing $143.2 million against a domestic total of $62.7 million, the film's revenue skewed overwhelmingly toward overseas markets. International box office accounted for roughly 70% of the film's total worldwide gross, a ratio that has become increasingly common and increasingly important for action-oriented studio releases throughout the 2010s. This pattern reflects a broader structural shift that had been reshaping Hollywood's blockbuster economics for years by the time London Has Fallen reached theaters. Action films with straightforward, visually driven narratives, heavy on spectacle, stunt work, and internationally legible dramatic stakes, light on dialogue-dependent nuance or culturally specific humor, have historically traveled exceptionally well across international markets, often outperforming their domestic returns by considerable margins. London Has Fallen's premise, centered on a global crisis involving multiple world leaders and staged against the instantly recognizable backdrop of one of the world's most famous cities, offered exactly the kind of universally comprehensible dramatic hook that translates efficiently across linguistic and cultural boundaries, without requiring extensive contextual knowledge of American politics or culture that might otherwise create friction for international audiences. This international heavy revenue distribution also illuminates why the film's negative reception among American and British critics, while certainly a meaningful data point regarding the film's artistic reception, didn't translate into the kind of commercial catastrophe that might have followed a similar critical drubbing for a film more dependent on domestic markets. Action spectacle, particularly of the kind London Has Fallen delivers in abundance, has repeatedly demonstrated a capacity to generate substantial commercial returns from international audiences relatively independent of the specific critical conversation happening within English-language entertainment journalism, a dynamic that helps explain the sometimes puzzling disconnect between a film's Rotten Tomatoes score and its ultimate box office trajectory. Pre-release expectations, modest tracking numbers. Before the film ever opened, industry tracking services had established relatively modest expectations for its opening weekend performance, projecting a gross somewhere in the range of $20 to $23 million from an opening footprint of 3,490 theaters across North America. This kind of pre-release tracking data serves an important function within the film industry, offering studios, exhibitors, and industry observers a data-driven estimate of anticipated performance based on factors including audience awareness surveys, ticket pre-sale data, comparable film performance history, and social media engagement metrics, all synthesized into a projected opening weekend range that studios use to calibrate expectations and, in some cases, adjust marketing spend in the final weeks before release. The 3,490 theater count itself provides useful context for understanding the scale of distribution the studio committed to for this release. This represents a wide, mainstream theatrical release pattern, indicative of a studio's confidence that the film could draw meaningful audiences across a broad swath of the North American exhibition market rather than a more cautious, limited rollout reserved for films with uncertain commercial prospects. This distribution scale reflects the film's positioning as a legitimate wide-release action tentpole, backed by a marketing campaign designed to maximize opening weekend awareness and turnout. A crowded weekend, competing against Zootopia. Crucially, London Has Fallen's theatrical release didn't occur in a vacuum. It opened during a specific weekend that also saw two other notable releases hitting theaters, Disney's animated feature Zootopia and the dramedy Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, starring Tina Fey. This kind of multi-film release weekend is standard practice within the industry's release calendar, but the specific competitive dynamics at play in this instance proved particularly significant for understanding London Has Fallen's ultimate box office performance and positioning. Zootopia, Disney's ambitious and critically acclaimed animated feature exploring themes of prejudice and stereotype through an anthropomorphic animal society, represented an entirely different kind of audience draw than London Has Fallen, a family-friendly, critically beloved release with the full weight of Disney's marketing and distribution machinery behind it. The presence of a film with this level of broad, multi-generational appeal sharing the same release weekend created a formidable box office obstacle for any competing release, regardless of genre or target demographic, given Disney animated features' historical tendency to dominate their opening weekends with remarkable consistency. Opening weekend performance, previews, day one, and the full tally. The granular breakdown of London Has Fallen's opening weekend performance offers a useful window into how modern theatrical releases build their box office totals across the crucial opening days. The film generated $850,000 from Thursday night preview screenings, the increasingly standard practice of offering advance screenings the evening before a film's official Friday release, allowing eager fans to catch the earliest possible screening and providing studios with an initial data point regarding audience enthusiasm heading into the full opening weekend. This preview performance translated into a first-day total of $7.6 million once Friday's full day of screenings were factored in, a figure that provided an early signal regarding the film's likely trajectory across the full three-day weekend measurement period that the industry traditionally uses to assess opening performance. From that Friday foundation, the film went on to accumulate a total opening weekend gross of $21.6 million, a figure that landed comfortably within the range that pre-release tracking had projected, suggesting that whatever marketing and awareness campaign the studio had executed in the weeks leading up to release had accurately calibrated audience expectations and interest levels.